Hi, I'm Elvire from the Dimitrov Piano Duo, and today I want to talk to you about something very simple, but something very effective that you can apply in your practice. And that is isolating the problem. So I had a student this week who was practicing this piece and had some trouble with it, and I know a lot of you actually study from this book from the Elvire. So I thought that it would be a good example also for today. So this is the piece. Notes, they're actually not played rhythmical. So if you would have a normal classical piece, you would be playing, but with blues you play long, short, long, short, long, long, short, long. So instead of, that would be classical, that would be a rhythmical eight notes, and a blues is always long, short, long. So that as a side note. Now let's look at isolating the problem. So I think the difficulty of this piece is actually the switching intervals. So if you're a beginner, this can give you a lot of trouble. And the thing I want to talk to you about today is isolating the problems. I think that when you're a beginner, you got a real chance to start building the right habits. The more right habits you build, the faster you'll progress and the more joy you'll have later on in piano playing. And one of those really good habits to build is isolation of the problem. Isolation of the problem is something that is going to save you a lot of time. So what do I mean with isolating the problem? If we look at this piece, the main difficulty here, I think, is the switching intervals. So we've got an interval, a sixth, right? We have an E and a C, that's called a sixth. If you don't know the intervals yet, don't panic. It's not necessary to know everything at the beginning, you know. You can just take your time and study intervals later. But we've got these two notes. And that goes on for a few bars until we switch to this interval. And it goes on one bar, but then we switch to this interval. We play that two times, a couple of times actually, until we switch again to this interval. Then we switch back to this interval, go to a new interval, switch back to this, and switch back to this. So basically, that is what is the difficulty here. Switching intervals, if we take just separately the right hand, we can practice only, first, just getting to know these intervals. This is already called isolating the problem, because you kind of peel down like the layers of the piece. You take away anything that's not necessary, anything that's not tricky, anything that's easy to play, and you don't play it. Because that is going to be a huge time saver. If we only play this, what is difficult, just getting to know those intervals, then you save yourself already a lot of time. So in this case, because the piece is very short, you're going to save yourself a couple of minutes. So for example, you can save yourself up to 10 minutes of practice time with this. Every single time that you play this piece and you isolate this problem, you can save yourself 5 to 10 minutes. And that might not seem like a lot, but later when your pieces become longer, this is going to save you literally hours. You can imagine Dimitar and I, we are practicing programs that are hours long and sometimes pieces that are half an hour long. And if we don't isolate problems, there are not enough hours in the day to practice your piece. So start building the right habits from the very beginning. And if you're already more advanced and you're watching this, it's never too late. I mean, a lot of these practice habits I've also learned later on, so don't worry, it's never too late. I'm just saying for the beginners that are watching, already start with those right habits because you're going to have a lot of joy later on. So let's look at it. We just isolated the problem and we took just the intervals. Now, I wrote an exercise for my student. I'm going to share it with you in the description box here down. You can download it and take a look at that. Even if you're not interested in practicing the piece, take a look at the exercise I wrote so you can write something similar for the piece you're struggling with. So what is mainly difficult? Let's analyze the piece. We're going from one bar, from the G to the next interval in the bar, which is the same. Now here, at the end of the system, we go from the G to something different. So actually this G that we keep on seeing is a transition note. So what we're doing is we have the first interval. Basically we have a lot of notes in between blah, and then the last note we have is the G, and the G transitions us to the next interval. I'm going to show that without the left hand. We're having the first interval. We have a lot of notes, but they're really not that difficult. You won't struggle with those much. Of course you'll have to practice it a bit, but that's not what is the difficulty of the piece. The last note before the new interval is the G, and then we transition to the new interval. So that is something that you could practice first as a first little exercise. G. That's basically what you're doing. You just have a lot of notes in between. So we really isolated the problem. Let's take a look at the next interval, which already comes a bar later. So we have a lot of notes. If you have trouble with those, just repeat them a couple of times. Then after that, we have one more time the G before we transition to a new interval, which is this. Then we have a lot of the same notes and intervals. And in the next system, we transition again through this G back to our first interval actually that we had at the very beginning, E and C. Then again the next bar, again through the transition note of this G, we have again this interval, we've had it already in the second system. Then we get in the next bar already, again through this G, a new interval, again the G, back to this interval, and through the G again back to this interval. So basically the G here is the transition note every single time. If you really want to isolate the problem in this piece, take a look at the exercise I wrote. I basically just wrote interval, quarter notes, G, new interval, G, new interval, G, new interval. So do that a couple of times. Practice it with a metronome. So to make sure that you get these transitions really, really well. And that's going to help you a lot. Now, if you've done that and you can't magically play the piece yet, that's very logical, because you do have to practice, of course, all the notes. I'm just saying that if you isolate the problem and you practice the problem a couple of times, you are going to get ahead of this problem. Your problem is going to be on the same level as all the other notes in the piece, all the other things in the piece that you have to practice. And then with some repetition, with some practice, you're going to get your piece up to the level that you want it. If you don't isolate this problem, what's going to happen is you're going to practice the piece, it's going to sound pretty good, but every time you're transitioning to a new interval, you're going to lag behind. And this can be very frustrating. So I think that this is a very simple, but very, very necessary and effective part of practice. Whenever you have problems, really kind of strip down the piece and take a look at the problems that you have, the essence of the problems, simplify those problems and practice them, isolate them. It's going to save you so much time and it's going to give you a lot of joy later on. Over the years, Dimitar and I have discovered that one of the biggest secrets to practice, basically probably any field, but practicing piano, is conscious practice. So always question, always try to improve. Dimitar and I are still trying to improve our practice, still trying to improve our playing, and I think that is just the biggest secret, or one of the biggest secrets that we can give you. I hope that this was useful to you. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Don't forget to follow us on Instagram and on Facebook. We upload a lot of our playing there. And if you are living in the Netherlands, don't forget to check out our website, because we are actually starting concerts again in, I think, just 2 weeks. So take a look if you want to hear us live and you are in the area, take a look and come check us out live. Thank you so much for watching, and we will see you again next week.